English-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and right off the top, I want to certainly offer my personal condolences and that of the government to the families who have lost loved ones as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. And I want to thank all of the healthcare workers right across BC that are working overtime, putting themselves at risk to provide this vital service to people who are concerned about their well-being, to people who are experiencing COVID-19 directly, and all the rest of British Columbia who know and understand the value we put in our healthcare workers who are always ready for the call. I also want to brief those in attendance and those across BC in the cross-government approach that British Columbia is taking to address the challenges faced by the pandemic that we're currently experiencing. Of course, Minister Dix and Dr. Bonnie Henry will continue with their daily briefings on the public health components that we're so concerned about. But I'm joined today by Finance Minister James and Education Minister Fleming so that we can give you in the media and those at home an opportunity to understand how we're going to deal with the challenges people are experiencing today in their communities and in their households. When I hear the top three things that are on people's minds across the province, it inevitably comes down to, will I continue to receive a paycheck? Is my job secure? Can I pay my rent? Is my business going to get through this? And that sense of concern about the consequences of isolation, self-isolation, the consequences of social distancing and the impact that has on the economy and on businesses is at the top of mind for British Columbians and indeed all Canadians. And so we want to talk to you a little bit about our plans and how we're proposing to protect workers and to support businesses. The number two issue, of course, I hear repeatedly is what's going to happen with our K-12 system, and Rob's going to be here to answer some of those issues so that parents and families that are impacted will have some idea of where we're going and the way forward. And lastly, I want to talk about the cooperation between various orders of government, how we've been able to work with the federal government and municipalities and in continuing to work with those two other orders of government to make sure that we're delivering the services and the comfort that British Columbians expect from their governments. When it comes to workers, of course, we're going to be amending the Employment Standards Act to protect workers and prevent layoffs in the event that someone has to stay at home to self-isolate in the interest of protecting their co-workers and their sector. We want to make sure that no one loses their job by doing the right thing, and that will require amendments to our Employment Standards Act. I've also made it abundantly clear to the federal government that when they're looking in the days ahead, we're expecting tomorrow, and Minister James will give us more details on that, when they're looking at the Employment Insurance Act, they need to make sure that they're not shortchanging people in this crisis. It's a go big or go home environment, it seems to me. The people that I've been talking to, whether they be in labour, whether they be in industry, the BC Business Council, Chambers of Commerce, Boards of Trade, this is a crisis situation and we need an appropriate response from all orders of government, and I'm confident that the Prime Minister and his team understands that. But there are improvements that can and should be made in how we access unemployment insurance or employment insurance in Canada, and this is the time to do that. With respect to the K-12 system, a difficult decision has been made to suspend K-12 learning in BC classrooms at this time, and the decision on how to return will be made in partnership with school districts and independent schools, and Minister Fleming will flesh out the details in that respect. When it comes to business and the economy, Carole James will be working on a package of financial supports for people and businesses. She'll touch a little bit on that. Again, I want to assure people that today we're talking about the plan and the path forward. The details of that really have to wait until we see what the federal government has done so we can complement that work. So I want to assure people before Carole takes the podium that we're talking about a framework here, and the details will be coming once we understand what the federal government is up to. So we're going to be taking actions when it comes to ensuring that businesses and the workers that they depend on are comforted and in place so that we can get through the next number of weeks. There will be a requirement for legislative change, as I said, on employment standards. We've been working in consultation with the two opposition parties. Minister Farnworth is working with the BC Liberals and the BC Greens, and I want to commend both of those caucuses for the approach that they've been taking to problem solving and working cooperatively for all British Columbians, regardless of partisan perspectives. This is the time when all of us need to come together and focus on the challenges we face, and we do want to make sure that we're protecting workers with the changes that we're proposing. But we also understand that bringing the legislature back is inconsistent with some of the other messages that we're giving to the public about not congregating in large groups. We've been working with Dr. Henry and the Speaker's office to find ways, working with the opposition parties, to find ways where we could have a vigorous debate on the changes we're proposing without having to bring every legislator back to Victoria. We could have a quorum of MLAs to debate the issues so the public has a clear understanding of the pluses and minuses, the pros and the cons, but we do not need to have a full legislature to do that. And Minister Farnworth is working, as I said, cooperatively with both of the opposition parties to realize that outcome. Lastly, before I pass the podium over to Minister Fleming, I just want to again reassert the notion that all of us are in this together. We have a cross-government approach to this. We have a cross-province approach to dealing with stakeholders in every corner of the province. Every sector is going to be impacted by this. We're going to need a plan. We're working on that. We have been for weeks now. The opportunity to flesh that out is just a day or two away as we await final decisions by the federal government. This is a crisis situation. There's no making that sound any better. I want to commend those who are taking appropriate actions for themselves and their families and their businesses, and I want to assure them that we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that your employment is maintained or your salaries are maintained. We're going to be talking about rent banks. We're going to be talking about challenges in the financial sector. Again, right across the board, when Minister James and I are reaching out to industry and business leaders, they are foursquare with us in trying to find a way forward for their companies, for their employees, and the province. So I'm encouraged by that, and I think British Columbia should be encouraged by that as well. And I'll just now ask Rob to talk about the K-12 situation, and then Carole will talk about the framework that she's developing with the federal government.
Thank you very much, Premier, and I want to thank in his absence and in advance of his news conference this afternoon, Minister Adrian Dix and our Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Henry. They were instrumental in what I'm about to announce on behalf of the Ministry of Education, and they've shown tireless leadership and good advice. As the Minister of Education, one of my responsibilities is to make sure that kids and staff and families involved in the school communities are kept as safe as possible in all of our communities right across British Columbia. We're used to schools being safe places where kids learn and grow and socialize. But as the global pandemic, COVID-19, is evolving quickly and it's having a growing impact in British Columbia, we have to take action today to protect our students and staff and keep our schools safe. So the actions that we're announcing today are ones that are well thought out. They're supported by all of the education partners, teachers, and stakeholders in the system. Since COVID-19 was first discovered abroad, the Ministry of Education has been in near daily communication with public health officials in school communities to provide accurate and timely information from trusted sources. We've followed the direction daily of public health officials and scientists in making fact-based decisions when it comes to BC's school system, and we continue to do that. Today, under the direction of the Provincial Health Officer, we are directing all schools to immediately suspend in-class instruction until further notice. Today, more than 99% of students in most public school districts are already on spring break this week, with the exception of Nechako Lakes. Spring break starts for those students tomorrow. There are a small number of independent schools also not on break yet. They are being directed now to suspend in-class instruction. We've urged schools and school districts to begin planning now to ensure a continuity of learning while in-class instruction is suspended in BC schools indefinitely. I have tasked my ministry to work with our education partners to coordinate these initiatives. We also expect school districts and independent schools will have plans in place to maintain some level of service for children of people who are performing essential services on the front line to combat COVID-19, people like teachers, medical health professionals, first responders, and pharmacists. Teachers will be prepared to plan for continuity of learning when their respective spring breaks were originally scheduled to end. That's March 30th. We will continue to work in consultation with our education partners as we plan how we will provide ongoing education services. We'll be in frequent contact with school districts and independent school authorities to ensure that we work through this challenge together and to look for best practices as plans are developed. I want to reassure Parents and students, every student will receive a final mark. All students who are on track to move to the next grade in the fall will do so. For grades 10 and 11 students, graduation assessments will be postponed. I know that parents of students in grade 12 will have unique concerns. Every student eligible to graduate grade 12 this year will graduate. The only graduation assessment required for grade 12 students is grade 10 numeracy assessment. Most of grade 12 students currently have fulfilled that requirement. The Ministry of Education, however, will work to ensure that all grade 12 students who have not yet completed this assessment and who are otherwise on track to graduate are able to meet this graduation requirement. The Ministry is also working very closely with post-secondary institutions to ensure that graduating students will transition successfully and smoothly next year. We also understand that there are vulnerable students in the education system who have unique needs. There are important services like meal programs and childcare services operating on school grounds that will need to be addressed. Schools are already considering these issues in their planning while we work together through these extraordinary times. We know some school districts will face unique challenges. We're prepared to meet those challenges together with our education partners, schools, school districts, teachers, teaching assistants, school boards, superintendents, and students. That includes consulting with our education partners as we plan for ongoing learning, and we will continue frequent contact with school districts to ensure we work through this together as plans are developed. We don't have all the answers today. We're in a fast-moving situation. As COVID-19 evolves, we must work together to meet the needs of students and school communities. Parents and guardians are asked to talk to their children about what is happening in their school community. Let kids know the steps that have been announced today. Let them know that they're designed to best protect them and to protect the people most vulnerable to COVID-19. Elders, seniors, their grandparents, people like that in our community. The decision to suspend in-classroom learning was not made lightly. It was made with the support of all school districts, teachers, partners and stakeholders, and under the direction of the Provincial Health Officer. I want to thank our education community who today and always put children first. This is a very challenging time in BC and around the world. Please take the necessary preventative measures to keep you and your families safe. If you think you have symptoms, the Ministry of Health has developed an online self-assessment tool. You can find it at covid19.thrive.health. You can complete the assessment for yourself or on behalf of someone else, or you can call 811 to pre-arrange health testing if you have symptoms. The actions we're taking today are temporary. We will return to regular school life down the road. In the meantime, look out for one another. And remember, we have to act together if we're to prevent the spread of COVID-19 further. Thank you.
I'm going to begin by echoing the theme that you've heard from the Premier and that you heard from the Minister of Education as well, which is we're all in this together. And that really is the focus we're taking when it comes to an economic plan and an economic strategy for British Columbia as well. First and foremost, we're focused on people's health and safety. Protecting people, following Dr. Henry's advice, is the very best way we can protect our province and our communities and our economy. We also need to make sure that any actions we take are in concert with our federal partners. And as all of you know, this situation is constantly evolving. And so our response to support for business, people, and the economy is going to have to evolve with it. British Columbia has a strong economic foundation, but there is no question that COVID-19 will have global impacts, and of course British Columbians will have impacts. Our economy in BC will be impacted. Over the coming days and weeks, I'm going to keep you updated on the fiscal and economic situation. We're also talking with our colleagues across the country, with experts and business leaders right here in British Columbia to really understand how these impacts are starting to unfold. I'm sure all of you, as we have heard from workers who are in precarious situations, small businesses who wonder if they're going to be able to survive, whether they're going to keep their doors open, and to all those people who are concerned, businesses, communities, people in our communities, I want to reassure you and let you know that we are working on how we can and how we must respond in the immediate. We'll also be looking to the future, but right now we're looking at how we support you in the immediate because we know there are challenges in our province. British Columbians can be assured that government has your back. Together we're going to get through this. And I think we all have to remember as well that this is a marathon, not a sprint. There are 3 streams that we're working on and that we're committed to as part of our economic strategy. The first one is to make sure that we have services and supports in place to protect the health and safety of British Columbians. Second, we're working with the federal government and with their initiatives to bring in immediate relief for people and businesses. And third, we will be building BC's plan for economic recovery in collaboration with the business community. I also want to recognize the remarkable work of Dr. Henry and Minister Dix and the hardworking healthcare workers and providers and supporters across our province. We know that the best economic plan we can have is to deal with the health and safety of people, and that's why that comes first. Now, you all will have heard the federal announcement of $1 billion for COVID-19 support, and the discussions about how and when that's going to be flowing to British Columbia are still in progress. They're still ongoing. The Prime Minister has stated that there will be an announcement in details tomorrow on how the Government of Canada's economic plan is going to respond to this crisis. You will know that one of the announcements already out there is that the federal government is speeding up the process for employment insurance. But as the Premier has said, our government is also strongly advocating for extending EI, extending the employment insurance program for people who wouldn't typically qualify. So that would include self-employed, part-time, contractors, and we're certainly hoping that we're going to hear that confirmation tomorrow. We're also collaborating with the business community to formulate the longer-term plan. We're looking at the immediate, but we also want to make sure we're looking at the longer-term plan because we do know that our province is going to move into recovery mode. But we're not there yet, and we need to act accordingly. We need to, as has been said by the Minister of Education, heed the advice of Dr. Henry and the Provincial Health Office about the steps we all need to take to care for ourselves and to care for others. I also want to reassure British Columbians that we have a healthy supply chain, that we have appropriate supplies of food and goods coming into British Columbia. The Premier and I had discussions with the Retail Council this morning, and they've assured us again that there's enough in stock right now for everyone. There isn't any need to overstock your own supplies. Doing so will put at risk seniors, single parents, and others who need those necessities. Shop well, plan ahead, but please don't go overboard at other people's expenses. So just to wrap up, I want to finish up again with a commitment that you're going to be hearing over the days and weeks to come. We're committed to working with our partners across the country and working with everyone in the province to be able to weather the pandemic. We're going to remain focused, as I said, on 3 clear priorities: supporting services to protect the health and safety of people, working with the federal government initiatives to bring in our own immediate relief for people and businesses, and building BC's plan for economic recovery in collaboration with the business community. Thank you.
Okay, so Jen, off we go.
Thanks, everyone. We do have limited time today, so we are going to have one question, no follow-ups, unless there's time permitting at the end. We'll start in the room and then go to the phones. Just a reminder for people on the phone, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1. We'll start with Keith.
So the Employment Standards Act needs amending, so I assume that's going to occur on Monday when the House comes back, or whatever day it comes back, in a quorum situation. So I assume we've secured agreements with the other parties to pass that expeditiously, and a supply bill.
We're in discussion with the opposition parties today. Minister Farnworth will have more to say about that tomorrow, so I'll leave that to him. But you've captured it. We are engaged with the Green Party, with the BC Liberals, with the Speaker's office, in consultation with Dr. Henry. What's the best way for us to manage the affairs of the province in a way that ensures appropriate debate? You don't need 87 members of the legislature, as you know, to pass a piece of legislation, and to have the appropriate oversight and scrutiny that the legislation would need to give people confidence that we're working together on these issues. The substance of the bill is in discussion as well, so details will have to wait. But we believe that there's a way forward. We've had preliminary support from the opposition on that, and I expect that tomorrow Michael will have something to say about that.
Mary.
question for Rob Fleming is with students looking at the foreseeable future, and I know things are still in flux, but what is the likelihood that it could transition for most students to online learning? And you talked about grade 12 students as well too. What are the possibility for students, graduation ceremonies, that sort of thing, or is it too early for that?
I think it's a little early for that. We'll take that on advice, but what we have the school sector working on right now is a plan around continuous learning, understanding that the suspension of in-class instruction could go on for some time in BC, and that'll look different for primary, intermediate, and secondary school students. A lot of classroom teachers contact regularly with parents and students via email already. We have 57 online learning providers in BC. Right now, the entire BC curriculum is available online, so it may be a combination of new types of classroom-based instruction that's electronic, organized through individual teachers. It may be transferring students into registering into online courses. We'll determine that as we go forward. We've got the sector putting their minds to it right now, and we'll have more to say about that later.
Fawn.
Minister James, there's about $1 billion in the contingency fund for the fiscal year ending March 31st, and another $1 billion or so in the year starting April 1st. You got any sense yet of how much of that you're going to have to tap to deal with all this, or is it too soon to say?
I think it's too soon to have specifics. I think there is no question it's going to have a big impact. It is likely we will have a deficit. I think there's no question about that. But the specifics and the numbers, it's just too early. It's changing every day. I think that'll be an economic update that I will need to bring forward. I'll be updating people as we go along, but it's a little too early to get into specifics. But no question it's had an impact.
Lisa.
Wondering about daycares. We're talking about schools being pulled out. What are people going to do with their kids? Are they still going to go to daycare?
Well, firstly, again, we're taking direction from Dr. Henry on these matters, and she's made it clear to us that healthcare providers and other essential personnel within the economy, within the infrastructure that we need to have in place to provide services to people, need access to childcare. And at this time, childcares will remain available. Parents should take comfort in that, but it is an evolving situation, and should the public health officials give us different direction, we'll be taking different actions. But at this time, again, schools are not boarded up. Instruction in classrooms is not taking place. That means that those buildings are available, and Rob will be working, or Minister Fleming rather, will be working with Dr. Henry and other providers to make sure that we're providing the services that they need. But at this time, it's business as usual, but families should be ready and trying to make plans for changes immediately if we get new information.
Binder.
I was going to ask about daycares, but I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the essential services, and for people who have school-aged children, what does that look like? And for others, could there be some financial relief for parents coming as well who might need to hire a babysitter or something? I don't know.
Well, I'll let Rob step in as well, but just preliminary, if we're looking at the changes we'd like to see in the Employment Insurance Act that will capture all citizens, not just those who are paying into the system, that would allow families to care for their children, self-isolate as required, and not lose revenues for their home budgets. But those are issues that are not yet certain, and so we don't want to assume that the federal government will follow through on these things. We have to see what they put forward, and then we'll see where we can work with the tools that Minister James has at her disposal to fill those gaps. But at the present time, certainly subsidies that families and daycare providers, childcare providers anticipate will still be flowing. No change there. People should not be concerned that they'll lose their space. We're going to make sure that everyone who has a space continues to have a space, as long as it's still consistent with the direction we're getting from public health officials. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Rob?
We've been asked to make plans by Dr. Bonnie Henry on how we can effect a suspension of in-class instruction for the school system writ large. but not collapse the healthcare system of those who are working to save lives, providing key frontline services, who would otherwise have to stay home because they have young children. So we're working with the sector to see what that looks like. It would obviously be radically different than what a typical school looks like, but it could be in use practicing safe social distancing and providing some kind of limited school instruction that will allow those frontline workers to continue serving British Columbians.
We're going to go to Shannon next.
So Ontario has gone ahead and said that it is going to not issue any eviction notices going forward, and it is not going to enforce any eviction notices that have currently been issued. Not a lot of details yet on the support people can expect from the province or the federal government. Is BC considering taking that step to make sure that people who might be facing financial difficulties right now can stay in their home?
That's very much one of the many issues that we have on our plate at the present time. I have asked Spencer Chandra-Herbert, the member for the Vancouver West End, who was the co-chair of the Renters Task Force, to revitalize his operation, to virtually have a discussion with the various stakeholders that participated in that very exhaustive review to get feedback on how people are reacting and responding to the current situation. I think when we get that information, Spencer will be delivering it to our Cabinet Committee on this issue, and we'll be looking at what steps we can take. But it's not just individual renters, of course, that are concerned. Businesses who have rents to pay and no customers coming in the door are equally concerned. So we have a whole range of issues that are piling up, and we're looking at what mechanisms we have to assist those individuals. But again, I want to stress this, as I did on Friday. The objective of our government is to provide services for people. That's why we're here. We do not want to come up short. I've made that clear to Deputy Prime Minister Freeland in our daily discussions that we all need to work on this together. Minister Robinson is dealing with the Union of BC municipalities as well as large municipalities on what are their needs going forward. Minister Shane Simpson on social development and poverty reduction. Of course, we're very, very concerned that at-risk populations don't have the same access to the types of services that many of us are talking about here, and we need to make sure we're taking extraordinary measures in those areas as well. So it is, again, a cross-government approach. Today we wanted to focus on people's concerns about their paychecks. Rent is a key part of that, of course, and the cost of living generally. How am I going to meet those needs when I don't see dollars coming in the door? So what role does hydro play with respect to hydro bills? What role do other government agencies play to ensure we can get dollars to people quickly? And that's been a common theme. I can't speak specifically to Premier Ford's proposals, but I did have a lengthy discussion with Premier Kenney yesterday about Alberta's approach, and we are very similar in our requests of the federal government. And again, it's with a positive foot forward to try and find ways that we can all come out of this better off than we went in. I have not had a chance to talk to Premier Ford, but it's on my list of things to do today.
We're going to take some questions from the phone lines now. Richard Zisman from Global, you're first.
Either the Premier or Minister Fleming, how can you say to parents that the schools are unsafe for instruction but are okay for daycare? And what is happening with camps that are going on next week that may be independent? Like, is the advice that those spring break camps continue?
Yeah, I think as the Premier mentioned earlier, around childcare services, those that take place, for example, on school grounds are reduced right now because it is spring break. They are on largely empty school grounds. But it's a fluid situation. It's one where we're updating the public daily, taking new steps, and I expect that you'll hear from the provincial health officer in concert with daycare providers in different settings around the province shortly about that. The second part of your question was around camps. Listen, I think parents are already experiencing some sense of disruption there. Municipalities are, in many cases, no longer keeping recreation facilities open that typically host those kinds of spring break camps. So I think that that is an area where The health officer has made it clear what safe practices look like for those that continue. There may be further instruction on the issue of camps, but the information that we're getting is that a large number of them are being canceled.
Our next question is from Shannon Patterson from CTV.
Hi, everybody. Can you tell us, Premier Horgan, what is on your financial wish list that you're hoping to hear tomorrow? What do you think the most important things would be to make sure, as you said, that no British Columbian will lose their job from this? Because with small business owners, they can't afford to pay somebody who is off for weeks at a time. So what do you need to hear from the federal government tomorrow that will actually make this feasible?
Well, thanks for the question, and there's a whole bunch of things that go through my mind and go through the work that Minister James and I and our cabinet colleagues are working on when it comes to addressing the gig economy, the cultural sector, where the hospitality sector. If you're depending on tips and nobody's showing up at your restaurant's going to close, you're going to be out of work, and you will not be able to recoup the wages that you were living on based on the current provisions of the Employment Insurance Act. So we want to make sure that they're expanding those provisions to capture the individuals, but also recognize that they need to be closer to full wages rather than half wages or three-quarter wages, depending on what the circumstances are. So we want flexibility from the federal government on these questions about contract workers, self-employed individuals, hospitality, cultural sector, and so on. People think about the Canucks shutting down, and of course people are unhappy they don't get to watch hockey, but the consequences for the thousands of people that depend on these regular events to be happening, they are not necessarily going to be, as part-time workers often, not going to be captured in traditional employment insurance sweeps. So we want to make sure that they understand that. Every time we have a conversation, I get the sense that that's clearly understood, but the implementation of these programs will fall to the federal government initially, and we'll just have to wait and see what they come up with. I'm confident they're hearing what we're saying. I'm not as confident that we'll be able to see a positive end result, and that's not any being disrespectful to the people that are working hard in Ottawa to deliver on these important issues. But I have been in government for some time and around government for even longer, and these are seismic changes in how we do business. Delivering services at the provincial level, assisted by the federal government, is always complicated, and when you're 3,000 miles away, apologies for not converting to metric, that's just how I remember it, it's harder to get that communication straight and get it right. So we're hopeful and optimistic, and we'll await their decisions, and then we'll see what we can do to fill in any gaps.
Next we have Justine Hunter.
Hi, I think this is for Minister Fleming. Do we have a sense of how many essential healthcare workers and others, people that have kids in school right now that will need a place for their children to be cared for if they're going to show up on the front lines when we need them?
Yeah, we're gathering that information right now, but we have 550,000 kids in our public school system, so it would be a very small portion of that, but an essential portion in terms of making sure that we don't reduce any capacity to respond to the healthcare needs of British Columbians. So we'll have more to say about that later, but we are gathering that information right now.
Next is Les Lane.
Well, Minister James, you got the letter from the Chamber of Commerce requesting breaks in various forms on the payment of the employer health tax, the PST, and WCB premiums for businesses. Can I ask what your sort of first impression is of that letter, and regard also the request that municipalities lose the ability to charge 10% on the late payment of property taxes this summer?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, we are looking right now at all the options and ideas coming forward. The Premier and I have been engaging, as ministers have been engaging, their stakeholders. So we've been talking to leaders in the business community across British Columbia. We've been receiving all kinds of ideas and approaches. So we are in the process of reviewing all of that. The first key, of course, as I mentioned, will be to look at what the federal government package looks like, to look at where there are gaps, or to look at where there are opportunities for us to be able to add to federal programs to be able to provide more support. So that will be the first step. As I said, gather the ideas. We've been doing that over this last week and a half. I know there are more coming in. Then take a look at the federal package and then develop from that our package to provide support to people and businesses in a wide range. So as I said, everything is on the table at this stage.
Next, we have Marcella Bernardo.
I wanted to ask the Premier especially, we've been getting lots of mixed messages about everything that's going on regarding airport arrivals and screenings, and we've heard from several listeners that they're not screening at the airport like they should be. What concerns do you have that we may have been too lax in letting people come into this country who may be sick, and now the situation is only going to get worse?
Well, certainly the border issues are the responsibility of the federal government. We have been working collaboratively on a range of issues, the borders being among them. I understand when it comes to logistics chains and supply lines, the relationship between Canada and the United States is critically important from coast to coast, right along the 49th parallel. But we are very concerned, and Minister Dix was categorical yesterday, and I fully support that position, that if people are coming to visit, if they're coming to Butchart Gardens, it's best to come in August, not to come in April. And that's a message that we had hoped the federal government, and quite frankly, the federal government supports that. But we also need to be sure that we keep our lines of trade open, not for any other reason, to make sure that our shelves are stocked, the food that we do import has access, and those critical to the functioning of our economy, our healthcare system, and a whole host of other issues have free access. When it comes to airport screening, that's another question. There are issues there that I will leave to the federal government to address, but I've heard similar things, Marcella, from constituents in my community concerned about these issues. I heard today on the radio in my community, the Black Ball Ferry, which has been operating for 60 years. I used to work on it a long, long time ago. People were concerned, why is the Coho Ferry still running? Well, it's bringing Canadians home, which was the request of the federal government. So we need to be mindful that every time we see something that may not seem right, it's not that there was not a check and some other point along the line, whether it be entry to the flights or getting off the flights. People are not always seeing everything that's going on. But it's pretty clear to us that the federal government is seized of these issues, and we've been making it clear from our side that when it comes to Washington State particularly, and I spoke with Governor Inslee yesterday, serious challenges there. He no hard feelings. He absolutely understands. His message to Washingtonians is the same: stay home. If you're going to be self-isolating for 2 weeks, better to do it in your own home without any impact on a healthcare system, whether it's an American one or a Canadian one.
Our next question is from Derek Penner.
Hi. Yeah, in addition to the discussion about assistance to business, I've been talking to a small business owner today who's not very encouraged by what they've been learning about the federal assistance to small businesses. It seems to be geared more to larger businesses. How can you sort of convey that to the government, and how can you complement that to make sure, the 5 employee or 10 employee businesses are being looked after?
Yeah, well, that's a big challenge, and we're seized of that. And for most businesses, small and large, cash flow is the problem when economic activity slows to the extent that it's slowed in Canada and, in fact, around the world over the past few weeks. So we are hearing, again, it's about liquidity, it's about cash flow. Whether you're a business or an individual, you've got bills to pay and you're expecting revenue to come in. It doesn't come in, panic ensues. And so we want to reduce that level of anxiety by assuring people that the 2 orders of government, federal and provincial, are working to make sure that we're finding ways to help those businesses that are 5 and 10 people who just can't keep the doors open because no one's coming in those doors. We need to be able to ensure that they bounce back from this, what is a temporary disruption. I know it feels like we've been talking about this forever, but it will end. And Dr. Henry's clear on that every time we have discussions that for the immediate future, there are significant challenges. But we need to come out at the other side of this, and we need to do that knowing that our small operators, the 5 and 10 employee businesses, are able to get through this period of time, whether it be on property tax issues, whether it be on regulations that may impede their ability to keep their doors open. We're doing everything we can to meet that, but I can well imagine people feel that they're not in the spotlight until they hear themselves identified by a level of government, and that's why we're waiting for Minister Morneau to make his comments tomorrow before we start to respond and react, because we want to know where the shortcomings are before we start jumping in.
We only have time for one more question. Our last question is going to be from Tanya Fletcher.
Hi, this would be for the Premier, I think. I know there's some room for discretion right now with the ban on the gatherings of 50 or more people, and I just want to ask about that through an economic lens. I just took a spin around downtown Vancouver. It's a ghost town. Even though many are not ordered to close, many businesses, not just, bars and restaurants, but retail stores are voluntarily shutting down. So in light of the huge financial stakes of doing that, what's your message to business owners who are trying to weigh those difficult decisions? Should they be taking their own initiative? Should they fear public shaming if a cafe remains open, even if they can manage those 50 gatherings?
Well, that's a very, very good question, and those are the challenges that people are facing. I know this will be odd, but I heard from my barber today, who doesn't see me as often as she may see other people, but she was concerned. Do I stay open? Not a lot of people are coming in, so I don't want to be alarmist, and I don't want to be apathetic. That's the balance here. If businesses can keep their doors open and people are going to either come to shop or to get a service provided, we need to continue to do that. If you feel that you're at risk, you should stay home. But if you don't feel you're at risk, you can should participate in the economy. The restrictions on the collecting of large numbers of people in close proximity should be adhered to, and I think businesses who can continue to provide their service or their product without running afoul of that should continue. Again, people will make their choices, Tanya, as to whether they want to go out and participate in the economy. It's St. Patrick's Day. It'll be the worst St. Patrick's Day ever, I expect, in terms of the hospitality sector, which depends on this day to be a boost for sales. Well, it's not going to happen, but that doesn't mean we can't find other ways in the days and, well, more importantly, the weeks and months ahead to try and find ways to encourage people to get back into the economy, to help support those businesses that they've been depending on many times, as with my barber, for a long, long time. I don't want to see her fail because she's not seeing people come in the door. Similarly, in the hospitality sector and restaurants, beverage houses, places where people like to congregate, today is not the day to do that, but that's not to say that day is not far off. And we need to be mindful that we have to get out there at an appropriate time when it's safe to do so, and keep buying BC products, supporting BC businesses. I know that public wants to do that, and when the time is right, we'll certainly be working with Dr. Henry and Minister Dix to make sure the public fully understands when they should dive right in.
Thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have today.
Okay.